The legends are many. A mysterious stone, said to possess incredible power. But did it ever really exist? American audiences first heard of it in a best-selling book and movie called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But it was first known in Britain and the ancient world as the Philosopher's Stone.
I imagine it was called the Sorcerer's Stone in America, partly because it has echoes of Disney's The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but also because it has a link with magic, with sorcery.
In the ancient world, a philosopher was a seeker of wisdom, a powerful sage who endeavored to unlock the secrets of the natural world. The Philosopher's Stone was said to be the key. For thousands of years, the search for the stone would obsess the civilized world. No object except the Holy Grail would become more legendary. The first accounts of the Philosopher's Stone date to around the time of Christ. But it is clear from the way they are written that the stone had long been known throughout the ancient world.
The earliest mention of it I've managed to unearth is a treatise attributed to Maria the Jewess. That's probably from somewhere between 1 and 300 AD, and she's already talking of the Philosopher's Stone and its efficacy in transforming base metals into gold.
A way to make gold, the most precious of metals, a dream that dated back 1,000 years earlier to the Greek myth of King Midas, who turned anything he touched into gold. The Midas touch, an idea that still fascinates today.
Think about a person who could make gold. They could rule the world, they could tear down all the social and political structures that have been built up simply by being able to produce massive amounts of money out of lead or iron or copper.
But the Philosopher's Stone was said to have one other, even greater power.
The effect of the Philosopher's Stone on the human body, supposedly, was that it could extend human life to its utmost extent.
It could potentially make the holder of the Philosopher's Stone immortal.
A single substance that could grant whoever possessed it both unlimited life and limitless wealth. But what exactly was the Philosopher's Stone?
The definition of the Philosopher's Stone is also extremely obscure. You know, it is often said the stone is the most common thing on Earth and the most rare. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's the most difficult thing to do, yet it's child's play.
Though described in ambiguous terms, it is clear that the stone is not really a stone. It is not something that can be found by adventurers or unearthed by treasure hunters. It is instead something that must be created by seekers of knowledge and men of science.
The Philosopher's Stone is not a solid, rocky substance, but a compound substance that would have been a kind of almost a liquid or a gel.
The commonest description is that it's an unusually heavy red powder, or sometimes a red stone or a red globule. But you also encounter it as a yellow, waxy material, perhaps something like amber.
It is the philosophers of the Middle East, writing in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries, who claim that some among them have found the secret. They claim to know the ingredients for making the compound that is the Philosopher's Stone, and to have mastered the dangerous processes needed to combine them. It is around this time that another word begins to be used for these seekers of the stone: alchemists, a word with Greek and Arabic origins. It is after the start of the Crusades in the 1100s, with the increased movement between East and West, that tales of the Philosopher's Stone first reach Europe. They are found in the ancient Jewish, Egyptian, and Greek texts translated by the Muslim scholars who make alchemy part of their scientific studies.
The Arabs led the world at that time in the development of mathematics, in alchemy, and in medicine. They had the greatest doctors in the world at that time and the best medical schools.
The idea of the Philosopher's Stone soon captures the imagination of European scholars. Armed with fresh translations of these Eastern texts, they begin their own quest to produce the stone, but it will be a quest veiled in secrecy.
In all the ages in which alchemy was practiced, it was regarded as what in medieval times was called a mystery. That is, a craft that you learned by apprenticing yourself, and not something whose secrets were to be broadcast.
Like the Freemasons of the era, the medieval alchemists used symbols and coded words that baffle scholars to this day.
People pick up a book of alchemy from the early modern period, and it just seems like mumbo jumbo. It's full of symbolism and pictures and strange little glyphs. And what we have to remember is that alchemy comes to us through a craft tradition. People in the craft tradition had ways of maintaining the secrecy of their skills, the secrecy of their knowledge. They did this by using symbols, by using a specialized language.
While many alchemists recorded step-by-step formulas for making the compound known as the Philosopher's Stone, the ingredients they used remain shrouded in symbolism.
The problem is that many of these experiments involve materials that are not explicitly defined. They're given names, but we don't have a correspondence for what those names are.
For instance, a green lion swallowing the sun. Well, this really means that there's an acid which is dissolving sulfur. You have a peacock inside a flask. The peacock's tail represents an iridescent color which alchemists believe forms in their flasks just before they produce the red elixir or the Philosopher's Stone.
Those who have studied these alchemical accounts believe that one of the ingredients used to make the Philosopher's Stone is mercury, either in its pure form or modified in some way. The other ingredients are the subject of a continuing debate, but it is clear that whatever the mixture, it must be repeatedly purified and transformed by fire.
You also go through different phases which are indicated by different colors. So you start off with black, which then moves into white, then into yellow, and then finally into red. And when you reach the red stage, that is imminent before the production of the Philosopher's Stone.
And it changed its essence and its substance so many times that in a way it now contained all essences, all substances, all transformations. And that's why people believe that the Philosopher's Stone, once it was achieved, would then have the possibility of transforming anything it touched instantly, because it held within its compound all of the transformative processes in the natural world.
It is the promise of this ultimate power that makes the search for the stone so tempting and so perilous.
Trying to find the Philosopher's Stone, the secret of transmuting the metals, was so difficult that in absolute desperation, there might be some alchemists out there that appealed to supernatural agencies like demons in order to get that kind of knowledge.
Over the centuries, seekers of the stone will pore over ancient texts, consult rabbis, sages, and even angels. They will ingest poisons, risk madness, face imprisonment, exile, and disgrace. But a few, it will be rumored, will actually succeed. A sorcerer's stone that changes lead into gold. An elixir that can bestow immortality. Today, they are the stuff of fantasy, consigned to fictional realms where wizards weave magic spells. But for 300 years, through the late 1600s, during the golden age of Western alchemy, these objectives seemed logical and attainable.
Actually, science and magic, at least in the early stages of civilization, were not as disparate, were not as distinct as we now think they are. If you think about it critically, in magic, you take a series of objects and produce something totally unexpected from them. In science, you can be doing very similar looking things.
It is early European scientists of the 13th century, men known as alchemists, who take up the quest for the Philosopher's Stone. This mysterious compound, they believe, can be made into an elixir of immortality or added to base metals to produce gold. Though their goals sound supernatural, they have solid scientific reasons for believing it is possible.
In working with metals, it's very easy to change one or two of the properties. For example, we can take copper and make it yellow like gold or white like silver. We can change the hardness and softness of metals. So alchemists naturally made the extension. If we can change one or two of the properties, can we change all the properties?
If we do this right, if we choose the right ingredients, if our conditions are right, then we can take a mixture of something else and apply a particular material to it and make something that really is gold.
The alchemists call the concept transmutation, a process they see at work all around them.
If we look at nature around us, it's dynamic. Things are always turning one thing into another. So grape juice turning into wine and then into vinegar, or in the organic world, caterpillars turning into butterflies. So if this sort of change is normal in the natural world, why shouldn't it be in the world of minerals as well?
The ancients had the belief that this was also true of things that grew in the earth. That is to say that base metals might slowly in the earth turn into more noble metals, might turn into gold.
Just as you could maybe speed it up by putting a plant in a pot on a windowsill, you could speed up the process by taking metals, minerals, putting them in a pot, using a steady heat, maybe a higher heat than would be experienced in the center of the earth, and essentially just speeding up what was a natural organic growth process.
If alchemists could, with the help of the Philosopher's Stone, speed up the aging process by which they believed lead matured into gold, then logically, they should be able to slow that aging process as well.
What brings it all together is a desire to manipulate time.
In the alchemical mind, this same purification process that could make lead into gold could also create longevity, even immortality.
Just as it could remove the impurities of the metal and perfect them into gold, so too some European alchemists thought that the Philosopher's Stone could be a powerful medicine, that it would remove the impurities and the imbalances from our bodies and restore us to perfect health.
The transmutation of gold was simply a sign that they had been successful in their work, which was to transform nature, but also to transform themselves, and ultimately to attain immortality.
It is alchemists who create the prototype of the modern laboratory in order to combine and heat the chemicals required to create the Philosopher's Stone. It is a time-consuming and dangerous process.
First of all, alchemy constantly uses quicksilver, mercury, as one of the materials that goes into the making of the Philosopher's Stone.
There are a lot of hazards of working with mercury. One is that it can cause personality changes and mental aberration. It does have a certain toxicity. If you inhale the vapors, it can make your teeth fall out and give you the shakes.
They had furnaces that were within their labs, and those furnaces used charcoal. So there was always the hazard of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Creating the elixir of life, the liquid form of the Philosopher's Stone, required mixing a potion of heavy metals that the alchemist himself would ingest, intentionally or not.
They would handle these chemicals not only without precautions, but without even any knowledge that they were noxious or toxic. In the pursuit of the great elixir of life, they were, in fact, damaging their health and probably shortening their lifespan by decades.
But for those seeking the Philosopher's Stone, there were dangers outside the lab as well.
The true alchemists were not generally interested in broadcasting even their successes very far abroad because of the danger of kidnap and of torture to get their secrets out of them.
If the secret of the Philosopher's Stone got out, they could manufacture an untold amount of precious metals and destabilize not only the currency market in their own country, but in the entire world. It's one of the reasons why alchemy is illegal in most early modern states. Most monarchs don't want alchemists running around doing their own thing.
Was the danger real? Many of those who believed it was found their proof in the works of a very ordinary person, one who would become famous to both medieval monarchs and modern readers of Harry Potter and the Da Vinci Code. He was a humble 15th century bookseller named Nicholas Flamel.
Flamel was one of the great success stories in alchemy. He's one of the few alchemists where you hear maybe he did it. Maybe he actually made the Philosopher's Stone.
Throughout history, hundreds of scholars and scientists would search for the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. Some were the greatest minds of their time. Roger Bacon, the father of modern chemistry, and Sir Isaac Newton among them. But none would fire the public imagination more than a humble 14th century bookseller named Nicholas Flamel. Though he is mentioned in popular fictional works like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, to medieval readers he was a real, if mysterious, person.
I was actually with an octogenarian alchemist in Paris some years ago. He showed me this book, which actually was a copy of a book attributed to Nicholas Flamel.
Scientific and alchemical writings attributed to Flamel turn up in books published in the 1500s that are thought to be compilations of earlier works. Though his scientific contributions in these tomes are minor, Flamel himself becomes larger than life in the hands of modern best-selling fiction writers. In the Da Vinci Code, Flamel is said to be a Priory of Sion leader. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, he is cast as the alchemist partner of Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Both authors were no doubt inspired by the same book, a volume on hieroglyphical figures that was published in Paris in 1612. Claiming to be a copy of Flamel's own long-lost composition, it describes his search for the Philosopher's Stone some 3 centuries earlier. It is this account that will be woven into a larger and enduring mythos.
His story has all the elements that would make a great movie.
Born near Paris around 1330, as a young man, Flamel makes a living as a public scrivener, copying and authenticating letters and documents. Over time, he builds a modest business, buying and selling manuscripts. But his story and his fate change abruptly when he buys a mysterious book.
It consisted of 21 leaves, 3 times 7, both magical numbers. And on these leaves were inscribed mostly figures rather than writing, but figures that clearly linked the book to the alchemical writings.
It will turn out to contain nothing less than the formula for creating the most powerful substance known to medieval man, the Philosopher's Stone, a compound and a catalyst that can transform lead into gold and produce an elixir said to extend life itself. Flamel studies the book for more than 20 years, trying to decipher the coded symbols and arcane writing, but he has little success.
Some of the writing in the book was Hebrew, and he wanted to get an interpretation of this book desperately. However, at that time in France, there were not very many Jews. They'd been expelled.
Sometime around the year 1378, Flamel undertakes a pilgrimage to Spain, home to both a large Jewish population and a long alchemical tradition. On the way back, he meets a former rabbinical sage and physician to whom he shows a page from the mysterious book. It is enough for the aging scholar to make an identification. It is, he says, a copy of the original Book of Abraham. It takes years, but using the translated page as a guide, Flamel, aided by his wife, eventually decodes the book's recipe for making the Philosopher's Stone. According to the account contained in hieroglyphical figures, Flamel successfully used the stone to create silver in 1382 and gold soon afterwards.
Finally, he succeeded. He made substantial quantities of gold, according to his own account.
To many readers, there seemed to be proof to back up this claim. Though he was a poor scrivener, Flamel eventually constructed several buildings, one of which still stands today in Paris. And a biography published in 1761 included a list of the sizable bequests he made to the poor, taken from public documents.
He opened poorhouses around Paris and spent a lot of money on feeding the poor and helping the poor.
For those who read Flamel's surviving works, and the book alleged to be his own narrative of his alchemical successes, this was proof that he had indeed used the Philosopher's Stone to create gold, only to give it all away.
People thought that he had succeeded because all of a sudden this poor Parisian scrivener clerk has all this money. Where did the money come from?
Alchemy could be an explanation for otherwise unexplainable wealth. But his money didn't come from alchemical transmutations. It came from very clever real estate speculations and from the fact that his wife came from 2 previous marriages with a considerable inheritance.
Flamel was said to have survived into his 80s, no mean feat in the medieval times. He commissioned his own tombstone, decorated with strange symbols, sometime around the year 1410. His death was thought to have occurred soon after. But rumors later began to circulate that he had used the Philosopher's Stone to prolong his life and had faked his death to protect the secret. It was a story bolstered by the fact that several new books bearing his name were published long after his supposed demise.
These showed up in the 16th and 17th centuries. Whoever wrote them, however, just put Nicholas Flamel's name on it because he'd become a famous figure mythologically for alchemy by this time. And some of them were probably just written by booksellers or cobbled together by booksellers trying to get a good seller.
But some, then as now, believe the rumors and cling to any evidence that the Philosopher's Stone might be real. In the 1500s, that belief will be put to the test when one of the most powerful crowned heads of Europe brings dozens of alchemists to his court with instructions to find, once and for all, the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. From the frenzied search that results comes mystic tales of angels and a coming apocalypse, along with more earthly whispers of fraud, torture, and wife-swapping. Throughout the medieval period and what is called the early modern era of the 16th and 17th centuries, the most powerful people in Europe kept a close eye out for those who might have the power to create the Philosopher's Stone. The substance was seen as a potential wild card, something that might influence the constant wars and discord between countries or bolster threats from within.
The kings and cardinals, nobles and popes were all interested in alchemy. Firstly, because it was the mainstream science at the time, but also, of course, it gave the great prospect of untold riches, and they wanted to have the riches for themselves.
Though European rulers frequently outlawed the practice of alchemy altogether, there was always one exception: the alchemist who worked for them.
Most monarchs really are not adverse to the idea of alchemy itself. They're just adverse to alchemy falling into the hands of the wrong people. So a crown-sponsored alchemist was a great asset.
No monarch was more interested in alchemy than Rudolf II von Habsburg, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, King of Bohemia and Hungary. Prone to melancholy, Rudolf was drawn to alchemy, perhaps as a cure, or simply because it relieved the tedium he found in affairs of state.
Now, Rudolf is known to have been very interested in alchemy. Not only did he acquire several books on the topic, but also he engaged himself in alchemical transmutation.
He was the Holy Roman Emperor, who was meant to represent the interests of the Vatican, and in fact was more interested in pursuing forbidden knowledge, occult knowledge.
In the mid-1500s, Rudolf began inviting alchemists to his court. As many as 200 passed through his royal estates at Prague, where he conducted his alchemical studies.
He gathered together some of the greatest minds of Europe and made Prague the intellectual and cultural center, and set up laboratories throughout the Prague castle.
It's probably fair to say that if you were an alchemist in that period of time, in late 16th century, early 17th century, a visit to the Habsburgs was certainly something that would improve your career. He oftentimes went down to his workshop that was located right there at the castle. The fact that Rudolf, who is at this time the emperor, would engage in alchemical practices seemed to many people to be below his status. What is a prince doing in a workshop? You know, he's supposed to be the head of state.
Among those drawn to his court was John Dee, a respected Cambridge scholar in the English court of Elizabeth I. Dee, like many scientific minds of the time, had a strong interest in alchemy and the power of the philosopher's stone. It would come to dominate his life.
Dee's interest in the Philosopher's Stone began, as far as we can tell, way back when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge University, when he began an extensive reading program in the great classic works of alchemy. He read Flamel, and he came to believe at this point that alchemy had the potential to unlock the secrets of how the world was put together.
But by 1580, Dee still had no successes to record.
And for Dee, this seems to have been the moment when he began to cast around for a better, more reliable way to learn about the natural world. And it was at that moment that he felt God revealed to him a new path.
Dee set aside his alchemical beakers and crucibles and picked up what was known as a scrying crystal.
There was a widespread belief in early modern Europe that shiny objects could be stared into by someone who was uniquely sensitive to picking up sort of the messages that were reflected there. What Dee discovered, much to his chagrin, was that he was not one of those sensitive people.
For the process to work, Dee needed a partner.
He had to rely on a technician, another person who could see in those shiny objects. And he had a number of these technicians that are called scryers. The one that he seems to have had for the most time was Edward Kelly, a man of very murky origins that we don't know all that much about.
Some claim that Kelly had several assumed names and that his ears had been mutilated, something that in medieval times may have indicated a conviction for counterfeiting or fraud. But he also had a knowledge of mysticism and alchemy, something the scholarly Dee would have responded to.
That Dee was either extremely gullible or Kelly was very cunning, but probably both. But he insinuated himself into Dee's family and became his irreplaceable assistant.
During marathon scrying sessions, Dee fills page after page with the angelic messages Kelly relays.
What happens is that the scryer describes seeing a great plane of crystal, and on that surface of crystal there are letters inscribed, and an angel stands on this sort of floor of crystal with a stick and spells out their message to Dee. Sometimes in English, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in a completely different angelic language. So this was an enormously time and labor-intensive activity, and it's not something anybody would have taken on unless they truly believed that it had the power to reveal very deep and very profound secrets about the natural world.
And the angels don't disappoint. Through Kelly, they reveal to Dee an incredible vision of the future.
The angels tell Dee and Kelly that after a period of 7 years of study and revelation, that they will be able to produce the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone that he and Kelly will produce in their laboratory will not just be a medicine, will not just be something that can perfect the natural world, but will actually bring about the long-awaited apocalypse, will bring about the transformation of the world and usher people into the land of peace and plenty, a second paradise on earth.
It is in the midst of this great work that Rudolph II invites Dee and Kelly to his court in Prague. But just before they leave, the relationship between the two men begins to deteriorate, shaken by an especially disturbing message from the angels.
The angels tell Dee and Kelly that one of the things they need to do in order to make the Philosopher's Stone is that they have to share all things between themselves equally. And this even includes their wives. But a few days later in his diary, Dee notes down, "Pactum factum," the pact is real. So which indicates that the two men did swap their wives and did actually physically consummate their relationship.
The consummation of the pact seems to have broken an already strained relationship.
Kelly's interests were more and more turning to alchemy. He wanted to spend more time in Rudolph II's laboratories and less time in Dee's room looking into a crystal ball.
The pair's sponsor, Rudolph II, also begins to distance himself from Dee's angelic interaction.
Rudolph really became concerned about the association with demonic magic. Maybe he was now engaging in something that crossed the line from natural magic and moved into demonic magic. And as a result, he actually banned John Dee from his court, but not before finding out what he could from him.
In 1589, Dee and his wife return to England. There, the 7-year deadline, the date by which the angels had promised the great secret of the stone would be revealed, comes and goes.
Dee writes, "All is false. All of the promises that the angels have made to me are nothing. The end of the world is not coming." His fondest hopes about what alchemy and what angels can do to bring about a new world of peace and prosperity have come to absolutely nothing.
In despair, Dee burns reams of his angel transcripts and abandons his quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Meanwhile, in Prague, Kelly's star rises. He claims that he alone possesses the key to transmutation.
He's given a title, he's given access to the laboratory spaces, he's given his own assistants for the very first time. People begin to whisper that he's found the Philosopher's Stone and that he is mounting up a huge store of riches.
Did Kelly withhold this last secret from Dee? Or was it all just an elaborate fraud designed to fool King Rudolph? Either way, Kelly will pay a high price for his claim. By the 1500s, the printing press helped spread the word about the Philosopher's Stone. Over the next century, dozens of eyewitness accounts began to appear, telling of an alchemical process that can change ordinary metals into gold.
One of the things in the 17th century that developed was the increase in the number of accounts of transmutation, that is, transmutation histories.
Many of these transmutation demonstrations were often accompanied by a medallion that had been cast by the alchemists. And these have been retained, so we have actual pieces of these transmutations.
Were these witnesses finally seeing proof of the existence of the Philosopher's Stone, or something else?
Well, they had all kinds of very ingenious tricks. They would do a fake transmutation. And that was usually accomplished on a small scale by such means as having crucibles with two bottoms, one of which would melt away to release gold that was hidden in the bottom, or using a wand to stir the mixture with, which would again melt away and deposit some gold. Anyone who has seen a good modern magician knows how easy it is to dupe people.
But even those who were skeptical couldn't come right out and say so.
Oftentimes, there might be a demonstration at a castle in front of persons that would be of importance. What happens is you have persons whose dignity and whose status cannot be assuaged, that person's truth-saying ability is beyond reproach. One of the difficulties, if you're a skeptic, is, on the one hand, you could claim, okay, the person didn't really do a proper transmutation. But if indeed the emperor had seen that transmutation, in effect, it would be almost like calling that emperor a liar. And there are social constraints about doing such a thing.
It is during this period that phony alchemists made a living by claiming to possess the stone and selling portions of it to gullible buyers, then skipping town. But there were other, more elaborate ruses, often perpetrated at the expense of kings and emperors.
The script would go as follows. That was my last piece of the Philosopher's Stone. This is a work that takes months, if not years, to perfect. I'm going to have to live at your court. I'm going to need this material, that material, the other material. I'm going to have to get assistance and so on. And so the game would be prolonged for an extended time. Some of these alchemists got away with it for extended periods and then picked up their tents and left quietly. Others exhausted the patience of their patron and would be imprisoned, tortured, executed for their failure to produce.
This may have been the fate of wife-swapping alchemist Edward Kelly, who continued working in the lab of Rudolf II von Habsburg.
He may have been too good of an alchemist for his own good, because people begin to whisper that he's found the Philosopher's Stone and that he is mounting up a huge store of riches in his own private bank accounts.
He was imprisoned, and whilst in prison, Rudolf tried to extract from him the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, or at least his agents tried to do that.
Kelly's actual fate remains the subject of debate.
He tried to escape, and it seems that he broke first one leg and then the other.
Some people say he was pushed. Some people believe that Rudolf II concocted the story of Kelly's tragic death to cover up the fact that he'd actually fled Prague to parts unknown with his alchemical secrets. What we know is that we don't hear anything more of Edward Kelly after that time at Rudolf's court.
Rudolf himself also may have had cause to regret his involvement with the quest for the stone. For decades, rumors persisted that the emperor was driven to madness, either because of his obsession with alchemy or because he sampled the toxic potions himself.
So there's been some serious questions about his mental health, although it's hard to attribute that really to alchemy.
He suffered from inherent melancholy, which today we would call manic depression. His obsessive search for the Philosopher's Stone did, in a way, end in a personal disaster, because he had failure to find it, I think, only increased his depression.
By 1606, Rudolf had lost his throne. Found unfit to rule, he was replaced by his brother. Alchemy's reputation would soon go into decline as well.
The backlash against alchemists came from various civic authorities or even national authorities banning the practice of alchemy. It was really more a secular backlash against citizens being defrauded.
After the Renaissance, alchemy began to be called chemistry. Though both words were drawn from the same Greek root, cheo, chemistry eventually became the more popular term and was, in the end, a way for scientists to distance themselves from the rumors of fraud and black magic that still swirled around alchemy.
Down to about the end of the 17th century, the words alchemy and chemistry were synonymous. They were used largely interchangeably. It only comes later, in the 18th century, that the two split into pretty much their modern meanings.
People began to decouple alchemy from chemistry and began to associate chemistry with the kinds of assaying and weighing and quantitative methods, and also the interest in qualities of chemicals, from alchemy, which they now started to speak of as only the transmutatory art of turning base metals into gold. There is a kind of artificial divide between alchemy and chemistry.
Where chemistry is a modern science, and alchemy is this sort of shady, somewhat disreputable practice that you really don't want to be involved with.
For the last 200 years, scientists who have looked back on the period have deemed the search for the Philosopher's Stone a fool's quest, and alchemy itself a pseudoscience. But that assessment is changing.
Many of the techniques of chemistry, even if they were not initiated, invented by the alchemists, were nevertheless perfected by them. And we're talking about such fundamental operations as crystallization, distillation, sublimation, fundamental processes in chemistry.
If you went into a chemist's laboratory in the middle of the 20th century, you would often see the same sorts of glassware and see the chemists doing the same sort of operations that you would have seen had you walked into an alchemist's lab in the middle of the 17th century.
Alchemy also had a direct effect on some of the world's greatest scientific minds, like Sir Isaac Newton.
We have over 1 million words that Newton copied out from alchemical texts. So clearly, he was a very close reader of these texts. We also know that he worked in a laboratory doing alchemical experiments. One of the matter theories that the alchemist held was that matter was made up of tiny corpuscles that could combine and had specific properties. And Newton seems to have borrowed a good deal of this material in his own science.
In both science and fiction, alchemists are making a comeback. In the book Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Nicholas Flamel, Dumbledore's unseen partner, is said to be 666 years old. But author J.K. Rowling isn't the first to suggest that Flamel didn't die in the 1400s.
Several centuries later, there are records of him being in India and in Uzbekistan in Central Asia, and even appearing in the opera in Paris in the 1870s. Did he acquire the Philosopher's Stone? Perhaps he's still alive today.
John Dee, whose search for the Philosopher's Stone drove him to despair, is also enjoying a renaissance.
Dee's works are published and reprinted. They're very popular among New Age spiritualists. You can even buy transcripts of his conversations with the angels in case you want to try this at home. John Dee would have been extremely gratified to know that the fame and recognition that eluded him under Elizabeth I has in some respects been given to him in the 20th and 21st centuries.
As for the alchemist's central goal of finding the Philosopher's Stone and transmuting substances into gold, that objective is now possible.
We can transmute in the sense that nuclear reactions can take the nucleus of other elements and turn them into the nucleus of gold. But the cost for that in terms of building accelerators, operating them, having the crew and so on, is millions, if not thousands of millions of dollars per microgram of gold. It isn't worth doing.
As for the stone's other attribute, extending human life, in an age of wonder drugs, health clubs, and cryogenics, our life expectancy gets longer every year. Though so far, the ultimate prize has eluded science, the quest continues.
The dream of immortality is certainly a very old and I think persistent human dream.
So perhaps the dream of the alchemist is not so absurd.